Well, Justice Ferrara, thank you very much for being here today and being a part of the oral presentation and documenting your life as a justice, a judge, and a practicing attorney, and the great contributions that you have given to the state bar over your career. So, well, let me ask you the first question. What made you decide to become an attorney?
You know, I've thought about that after you gave me that list of questions, and that was one of the questions. When I graduated from undergraduate school with a BBA degree, I had absolutely no intention of ever darkening another courtroom, another classroom, because I'd had all the school I wanted to have. Didn't have any lawyers in my family, didn't know any, other than perhaps to know who they were, really didn't know any lawyers. When I got out and went to work in the insurance industry, which is what my degree was in, I said to myself, I've made a bad mistake if this is what I think I'm going to be doing. And I had, when I was living in the dormitory, there was 2 law students who lived at the other end of the hall. And we became pretty good friends. And I'd go down and ask them questions that were convoluted and really strange because I liked the classes I was taking in business law. And when they couldn't answer these questions for me, they'd say, Sidney, you need to go over to the law school and at least take one course and you'll understand why we can't do that. Well, that didn't particularly impress me either. But when I got out and the Korean War was underway and I was subject to being drafted, and a man at my church who was a vice president of Commercial Standard Insurance Company here in Fort Worth was kind enough to give me a job. I applied a number of other places, and because of the war and the draft situation, I didn't get one. And I was working at that insurance company, and one afternoon I just said, you know, I don't like this. I don't really think this is what I need to be doing. So I punched out on the clock and went to the draft board and asked those people, can I get a deferment to go to law school? The lady says, if you can get in, we'll defer you. So I went back and told them at work that I was going to leave and go to law school. Went home and told my folks that I was going to go to law school. And 2.5 weeks later, I was in Austin at the law school. And I went in and asked them if I could enroll. I didn't know lawyers. I didn't know what lawyers did. I didn't know enough about being a lawyer. If I'd have known what I know now, it might have scared me away, but I didn't know. And that's how I became in law school. And I loved it. I went summer and winter for 3 years. And
what year was that?
1952 to 55.
And at the University of Texas?
At the University of Texas.
At Austin. Okay.
In Austin.
In Austin. Now, are you from Fort Worth?
Yes, I was born and raised
Born and
in Fort
raised.
Worth.
Where'd
Went to
you go?
Pascal High School,
Did you
went
go?
to Lily B. Clayton grade school.
And then where did you go to college?
I had planned to go to Swanee, and I had even gotten a letter from the coach wanting to know if I was going to play football when I got there so they could have equipment for me. Well, the price got raised significantly, and my folks didn't have the wherewithal to send me to Swanee. So I wound up going to TCU. It's $10 an hour at that time. And I thought I was just being robbed. I went to a church conference one summer and at Round Rock. And they gave us a trip into town to tour the University of Texas campus. And I thought, man, if I don't ever get back down here, life will never be what it ought to be. I just fell in love with the place. And that's how I got to be in Austin.
Okay, so now after 1955, where did you go?
When I graduated in 1955, one of my classmates and I, we knew we were going to go in the Army. Excuse me. And we walked downtown Austin and walked into the recruiting office. And the man wasn't there, and we sat there and rummaged through his desk and looking at the books on enlistment. And we found the 2-year enlistment. So we enlisted in the Army. We were regular Army. We weren't draftees. We were enlistees, and I got in the Army for 2 years.
So what was your rate? Or
I was a private. I was absolute private. And
where was boot camp?
pardon me?
Boot camp was.
The first time I'd ever been on an airplane, in July of that year, I flew to Fort Ord, California for the initial induction. Then I went from there to Colorado Springs, and that's where my first 8 weeks of infantry training was in Colorado Springs. After I finished that 8 weeks, I went to 8 weeks at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And Perry, that was almost like being in a dorm. It was a big 2-story building, and most of the people there were, like me, were college people. And they were going to make company clerks and that sort of thing out of us, and that's what we did. We were in clerk typist school.
You had a college degree from TCU. You were a lawyer.
No, I didn't have a college degree from TCU. I only went to TCU 2 years, and then I went to Austin.
Okay. And then you went in as a private.
And I went in as a private.
Wow. Okay.
And
then we're just
that was the quickest way I could get in and get out. I had several people in the military say, well, don't you think we ought to get you a commission? I said, if you can get me one, that's fine, but I still don't want to be here but 2 years. I want to get out. I haven't gotten to work at what I know how to do or think I know how to do, and I want to go practice law. So 2 years was the quickest I could get in and get out. When I got home from Korea, if you had 90 days or more left on your enlistment, they reassigned you. Had less than 90 days, they went ahead and let us out. I had 87 days left, so I got out.
Well, when did you go to Korea?
Went to Korea in the winter of 1955. I was on a troop ship in the Yellow Sea, Christmas of 1955. I came home in the spring of 1957.
Where were you stationed in
I
Korea?
was stationed at the replacement station first, and then I was transferred to the Ascom City Area Command, where I was a courts and board specialist. I did everything but try the courts martials.
Okay.
I was in effect a court reporter, is really what I was doing.
Wow, that was. And then, so after 1957, where did you go?
Well, I came home in the spring and went downtown Fort Worth and started looking for a job. And I went to several of the big law firms, and they didn't seem to be particularly interested in me. And I was over in one of my classmates' office when Judge Joe Edson came in, and they introduced me to Judge. He was not a judge then, of course, but they introduced me to Joe Edson, and he said, "You know, I came to town with a lawyer this morning who's looking for a young lawyer." And they sent me over to Gerald Walker's office at Kelly, Morris, and Walker. And Gerald and Garrett Morris hired me on the spot.
Where was their office located?
It was in the insurance building, corner of 9th and Houston Street. It's kind of behind where the then public library was.
Mm-hmm. What did you do? What was your practice when you got out?
It was primarily insurance defense work. Garrett Morris made me a vice president of the insurance company, and I handled their hospitalization claims, but primarily working with Gerald, I did insurance defense.
Mm-hmm. What was that like handling cases in Tarrant County back then in '57?
Well,
that was in the old courthouse, I assume.
yeah, my first year I was in the old courthouse. The second year they had constructed the civil courts building, and we moved over there. That's where there was.
The old former annex that's gone now.
I think there was 6 courtrooms, 6 district courts. One of my more memorable cases that I tried while I was working in that old courthouse, the lawyer on the other side, I remember in his closing argument in the case, I looked around and there was people standing in the hall, in the doorway, watching. And I thought, you know, this man's just like Abraham Lincoln, but what he's saying is not important, and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's really impressive the way he's making his argument. Lawyers were different then.
Did you type your own petitions? I mean, there weren't computers or.
No, there
So
wasn't
what did you
computers.
do?
We had secretaries, and being the new young man on the in the law firm, I did a lot of my own typing. A lawyer's secretary brought some paperwork down to our office one day, and it was for me, and I didn't know where it was. She said, "Well, I left it on your desk." Well, the desk she was talking about was in the back room where the typewriter was not my office, but it was back where I did a lot of the typing that was done.
How long did you work for this firm?
A little over 5 years.
Yeah, what'd you do after that?
Jim Claunch and I, he worked there also the last couple of years. We left and walked the streets of Fort Worth to find some place that we could rent and equipment we could buy. And we rented space in the what was the name of that building? It's the corner of 5th and Main Street. The Sinclair building.
Sinclair.
Excuse me. We were on the 4th floor. And the way our firm became Farrar and Claunch, we flipped coins. The one whose name came up first was the first name, and the other one got first choice of the two offices. And we were there for over 20 years.
20 years. That, was it the same practice?
Yes.
Insurance defense?
We both did. And we did some other things, but the major part of our practice was insurance defense. We did family law. We did probate. We did traffic tickets.
Did you do any criminal law?
The criminal work that I did because I was appointed by a judge. He would appoint people to represent indigent people, and that was the criminal work that I did.
Dude, okay. Did you get into federal court?
Yes, I was. I went over and got licensed in the federal court, and did 1 or 2 cases in the federal court, criminal cases. Again, was appointed by a federal judge.
Was your practice mostly in Tarrant County, or did you go to other counties around the state?
My law practice was primarily Tarrant County. May have been as far as Dallas, may have been as far as Weatherford, but the vast majority of it was all in Tarrant County.
Well, let's see, now that gets you up to, 1980?
1981.
81. Okay, now, you were married and have kids and
I'm married and have 2 children. I have a daughter and a son. My son's a lawyer in Fort Worth. My daughter is a computer person in Minnesota.
Did your son work, what's his name?
Stephen Farrar.
Right, and your daughter's name?
And my daughter is Diane Smith.
Did you ever practice with your son?
Yes.
You did? Okay, and now, were you active in politics, politically?
I guess that's what you call what you terminate as active. I was a precinct chairman and election judge for several years out on the south side.
And okay, so after 1980, what did you do as far as the practice of law?
Well,
what was your next step?
I was still doing the same kind of practice. I had been elected as a director of the Tarrant County Bar, and I was currently in my third year and as the chairman of the grievance committee in Tarrant County. And it was, first thing I'd do in the morning when I'd come in while I was on the grievance committee would be to try to solve grievance problems, see if I couldn't make the people that were complaining about lawyers, I couldn't make them happy and solve whatever problem they had. I got a phone call from Judge Ardell Young, who was the judge of the 153rd District Court and had been a very popular judge and a very popular lawyer with a big law firm here in Fort Worth. He called me and asked me if I'd be interested in he was going to retire, and he asked me if I'd be interested in succeeding him as a district judge. I'd never given any thought to being a judge, by the way, at least up to that point. And I thought that was one of the nicest compliments that I'd ever had.
Mm-hmm.
That judge would ask me if I would be interested in doing that. And I said, yeah, I suppose so. I went in and told Jill our offices were side by side, and I said, let me tell you about the phone call I just had. I just had a call from Judge Young asking me if I'd be interested in being a district judge. And I said, yes. You never know. Doors open and doors close. That was one that opened.
What did you have to do after that?
Well, I had an appointment with the committee in Austin, the governor's committee that made the recommendations. I drove down to that meeting because I wanted some time to think about what was likely to happen. And I had a nice interview, and there was several other lawyers in Fort Worth that were being considered for the appointment, and I knew either most of them or all of them, and I told them at the committee, I said, you know what, that's what they said. He said, you know, we have other people to interview. I said, yeah, and I know most of them, and any one of them make you a good judge. And then a good bit of time went by after the meeting, and I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know whether they were going to appoint me or whether they were going to appoint somebody else. And I'd come to work, continued practicing law, and my idea was that wonder what they're doing. I thought, well, it'd be nice if I get appointed, but it's okay if I don't. I've still got a good practice, and I'm doing okay. Then I got a call from Austin. Somebody in the governor's office called and said, the governor's going to appoint you as judge of the 153rd District Court. But we want you to let us make the announcement. We don't want you to
And then what governor was that?
L. Clemens.
Now, and this is an interesting point. He appointed you as a Democrat.
Yes.
Is that correct? Were you the only Democrat appointed by him?
No, he appointed Judge Bill Hughes.
And then what, that was in 1981?
Yeah, about a month or 2 months before he appointed me. He appointed him to the 48th District Court.
And there was no requirement for you to be a Republican or run
No.
as a Republican?
No, at the committee they asked me, said, well, how will you run? And my response was, you knew I was Democrat when you invited me down here. I have no reason to think that I'm going to change.
Okay, now after 1981, so how long did you serve on the?
11 years.
11 years, 1981, okay. Now, tell us about your life as a district judge. How did you like that? And did you enjoy the time on the court?
I liked being a trial judge. I liked to try lawsuits. I liked to deal with lawyers. The only part of being a judge that I really didn't care for was having to deal with commissioners' courts and budgets and that sort of thing. I just wanted to be a judge. Try these cases, do what the rules provided for, and bring on the next one. And that's what I did.
Did you have any interesting cases that you want to talk about or that you remember?
Well, there's two cases that I really kind of remember. I tried a case before Judge Walter Jordan. I tried a case that had to do with manufacturing of material. And the reason the best reason I remember the case is I lost, by the way. Now this was just a trial. I lost the case on a 10-2 verdict. And one of the jurors came to me after the case and says, Mr. Farrar, when I went into that jury room for the deliberation, I had no idea that you were going to lose. Well, I did. And the Court of Appeals upheld it. Then I tried one of the groundwater cases in Decatur with Mitchell Energy. There had been one tried very shortly before I tried that one, and the plaintiff prevailed for a several $1 million verdict. The one I tried went 12 weeks.
That was as a judge?
As a judge.
Yeah.
Went 12 weeks, and the jury took about half a day to reach a decision, and the plaintiff lost. And yeah, I remember that case, and it was a case that was very difficult. There were experts. Probably cost the plaintiffs over $1 million to try it. Probably cost Mitchell Energy well over $1 million to try it. Expert witnesses came from all over the country to testify, and one of the men that was one of the lawyers for the plaintiff had written articles about groundwater problems and was really a very knowledgeable person. Had a heart attack. It took him out of the courtroom for probably the last half to 2/3 of it. The lawyers that picked it up and brought it on still did a great job. And I think if they'd have cut one or two of the plaintiffs out that were a little obnoxious, they might have prevailed. But they didn't, and the Court of Appeals upheld that verdict as well.
Now,
But a lot of the cases on the Court of Appeals, my court in the district court was a general jurisdiction court, but we tried almost exclusively civil litigation. And as I had mentioned earlier, my experience as a lawyer trying criminal cases was not very extensive. And when I got to the Court of Appeals, all of a sudden I discovered that probably 70% of our docket was criminal cases. And the big part of those were sexual assault and sexual mistreatment cases. Family members with their children and with their neighbors' kids, and the verdicts were huge. But when the opinions came over and you were writing an opinion on it, they all looked just about alike. The same arguments were made, the same decisions are reached, and same convictions are upheld.
Mm-hmm. Well, that ought to bring me to the next question. When did you get to the Court of Appeals?
I was defeated for re-election in 1992 when the Republicans took over the courthouse. And I retired that December so that I would be a retired judge, not a, and that was I left office in December. And then I think it was probably March, maybe April, Governor Ann Richards appointed me to the Court of Appeals. I was on the Court of Appeals for 2 years.
2 years from 1992 to 94. Okay.
94.
What, did she appoint anyone else with you?
I don't think so.
Mary Ellen Hicks, was she at the same time, or?
I think Mary Ellen may have already been. I was the last member of the court. I succeeded John Hill, who was no longer, Todd Weaver was the Chief Justice. But John was appointed, I don't know, I don't remember whose place he took, but he took somebody, and I filled his place.
Okay. Who were your other colleagues on the Court of Appeals?
Well, there was John, there was Mary Ellen, there was David Ferris, Hal Lattimore.
Was Judge Brigham up there?
And Judge Brigham. And all the ones that were Democrats, we all lost in the next general election.
Cycle. Well, maybe that ought to be the next question is, what's your opinion about the partisan election of judges? And should anything be done about that?
Harry, I wish that I had an answer for that question. I think if this is what I told people, because I had a number of people that came to me and wanted me to change parties to run, And I said, you know, if my politics, if my political activity affects the way I operate and the way I behave as a judge, I ought to be impeached. I ought not be there. A lot of cases, particularly on the trial court, a lot of cases didn't come out the way, as I'm listening to them, as I would have wanted them to. But that wasn't my job to make. And I told some lawyers that were cleaning up the courtroom one afternoon after they'd finished and had a verdict. I said, boy, you wouldn't have gotten that kind of money from me. And the response was, well, Judge, that's the reason we pick juries. But my job was to let the parties and their lawyers put their case on the best that they could, and being fair to everybody involved. It's not my job to try to determine or to make a case have a result. That's just not a judge's job. And out begging for money is atrocious. And
do you have any recommendations, or what do you?
Yes, I have a recommendation. Would be to have if you're going to have an election for judges, that it be on a ballot without party affiliation, and you have the name of the court, and then just list the names of the people that are running for that office without any political designation, so that the voter has to go in and pick out the one out of this group of names and put it in the blank, and can't just arbitrarily do it by party affiliation. If you listen to the people around the courthouse, the lawyers, there was never a reason that I should have lost the election. But when you see areas of town that even today are 99% one party, I lost all of those.
Now, let's get on to the Court of Appeals, because I did check. You had like 20 published opinions, and you had a lot of non-published opinions. And how did you decide what should be published, or did you? How did y'all make that decision?
the court, the judges would vote as to whether or not the case ought to be published. My feeling, and when I'd do an opinion and I'd send it around to circulate, I'd write on it, let's publish this or let's don't publish it. And if it didn't have something new or unique in it, I didn't think we ought to publish it. Some of the other judges and I didn't agree on that. Some wanted to publish everything. You know, I don't work for the book company. There's no point in, if it tells something new, if it has a new aspect to it, then publish it, because that gives advice. Whatever, it gives at least some advice to the lawyers that are going to come after us. So don't publish everything.
What about the appellate briefs? Now, when you
I am not a good appellate briefing lawyer. At the start of the year, the judges would all come together, and all the applicants to be briefing attorneys would be there, and we'd interview them. And starting with the Chief Justice, they selected the one that they wanted to be their briefing attorney. And I said, all right, I know enough about football that I'm going to do that this way. I'm going to select, and I'm the last one, But I'm going to take out of the group that's left, I'm going to try to pick the one that I think is the best that's available, the best player that's available. And that's what I did. The young lady that I selected was with me for 2 years, and we never had a case reversed.
Well, is there any advice you can give attorneys when they're preparing their appellate briefs? So when an appellate justice...
Well, I went to, first thing that happened was, since I knew I didn't know a lot about being an appellate judge, I went to the Advanced Appellate Seminar. That's 4 days. The court had some large books, notebooks that they gave us that had the procedures and all of that sort of thing in it. And judges don't like to read more than they have to read. And they don't want to read stuff that doesn't have anything to do with what the case is about. So lawyers need to be, and there's any number of good courses, both in writing and in preparing those things, that the lawyers can study and take. And there's several books that are in all law libraries that deal with what you do, how you set your brief up. Now, what's going on in the world of technology today? I don't know, because I don't. I'm technologically disadvantaged, which means I don't have that equipment, and didn't have. And all of the courts had books and libraries. Now libraries are a pretty thing, but all the lawyers have computers on their desks. All the judges have computers. They don't use the books anymore. And I'm sure that's the same is true for, the nice thing about a computer is that if you put something down and you want to change it, it's very easy to go back in and erase it, or add to it, or delete from it, or make corrections in it. And I'm sure that's what's done before. And we put limits on the number of pages that you can submit, and try to make the lawyers understand that what you put in the brief is going to help the judge make a decision and to lead and to guide him in that direction, in the direction you want him to go. So it's.
What about how did your life change, so to speak, from going from a district judge to an appellate judge? How did that change the way you looked at cases?
Well, it made a big difference. In the trial court, the trial bench, you're interacting with lawyers. You're interacting. The cases come pretty fast, but you still have to, and you have to make decisions. When I first was appointed as a district judge, I walked across the street one afternoon with one of the judges who's on the Court of Appeals. He laughed at me and he said, "Well, Sidney, how do you like making decisions in 10 seconds that we get to take months to come up with?" And that's the difference. That's the difference. You have to get over that aspect of, I got to do it now. You know, they're sitting out there and objections made, and you've got to rule on it now. You don't put it away 2 or 3 months before you write an opinion on it. And in the appellate world, it's a lot longer than that. But generally speaking, your opinions are longer lasting than some of the things you do on the trial court.
Were there any type of cases that you found challenging or you liked better than other kinds of cases?
Well, I got real tired of criminal cases in a hurry. And it's because it seemed like there were so many that were just, sometimes I would feel like what they did was they took the appellate record of a case just like it and just changed the names and the dates, and here it is again, and here it is again, and here it is again. And there's some, whereas in the civil world, usually it was to the point where things had to be a little different for it to get, practicing law has become very, very expensive for the parties. And just to say if I'm court appointed in a criminal case, I'm gonna do whatever I can to put that same argument. Maybe I'll get a different result this time. But in civil cases, it's expensive enough that you can't do that, and you don't appeal every case. Okay, I think the judge made a ruling that was not correct, but what's my chances? What's my client's chances of correcting that by an expensive appeal? Sometimes it's not very good.
What advice would you give to anyone practicing trial law and appellate law nowadays? Either young attorneys, older attorneys, experienced lawyers?
Harry, one of the things that I think we have done in the practice of law is we have gone overboard on ethics. I wish that I could say that, and I can, I never met a lawyer or a judge that I thought had done something illegal, and we didn't have nearly as many rules as we have now. Ethics rules. How you came out of law school with the idea in mind that I'm in a noble profession, and I'm going to be honest about it, and I'm going to do what, to the best of my ability, I'm going to do what's right and what's honest, and I'm not, and I'm not going to let a client dictate to me things that are dishonest or are wrong. If you don't like the way I'm going to do it, and you want to do it some way that I don't approve of, then get you another lawyer. You're not going to get me. And as a judge, I have to put away my personal opinions about the type of case that it is and rule based upon what is presented to me and what the law is. I had a lady from the Star-Telegram came to my office one day, and she said, "Do you have a philosophy that you're going to follow?" I said, "Lady, I'm a trial judge. My philosophy is going to be try to find out what the law is and follow it as carefully and as honestly as I can." have to go to the Supreme Court. Maybe they'll have philosophies, but I don't.
Now, are there any what they call best practices that you would advise or encourage the attorneys or courts nowadays? Anything that could be helpful to like help the practice of law, help the trial law, the appellate practice? Any advice or recommendation?
Well, as far as the lawyers are concerned, I just the day I got word that I had passed the bar exam, I thought people ought to be able to look at me and know that I'm a lawyer. I was so proud of being a lawyer, and I never ever wanted to do anything that would detract from that. As a lawyer and a judge, I think we have built-in attitudes of what's honest and what's right, and I can only say that whether you're a judge or whether you're a practicing lawyer, be honest. I mentioned to you the other day that in our society today, people don't like lawyers. They think we're all crooks, except your own lawyer. Now, my own lawyer, he's just the noblest man in the world, but your lawyer's crook. And I don't know how we get the public away from that sort of attitude. And back to when I first started practicing law, and certainly in the generations before me, lawyer was our judge was a very well-respected person and not considered to be sleazy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where we got that. Mm-hmm. I know that probably even in your time, the thing that has become prominent in a law office today is the billable hour. We didn't have billable hours. Tarrant County put out a little booklet one time. I may still have a copy of it. It was called the minimum wage, the minimum Bar Association minimum fee schedule. The Supreme Court said that was price fixing, and they did away with it. But it wasn't, very little of it had anything to do with hourly rates. You're going to do a divorce, this is what you charge. You're going to do a personal injury case, this is what you charge. The county had one and the state had one. I always said if I could ever get where I was making enough money I could practice out of the state when I was going to be rich. But I remember when Fort Worth's first $1 million verdict. And that was everybody said it never happened again. Now we talk about billions.
When was the million?
Oh gosh, back in the early days of my career, mid-term of the practicing law. Probably a medical malpractice case.
Now, and this will be the last question, is do you have any advice for anyone who wants to pursue becoming a trial judge or an appellate judge?
No, because I never set out to be a trial judge. It came to me as quite an honor. Given my choices, I would have stayed on the trial bench for as long as I could physically. Charlie Murray could have, as an example, could have gone to the Court of Appeals. He's bright, but he liked the trial bench. He wanted to do trial work, and that's what I would have done. Bob McCoy has just left the Court of Appeals, and Bob's an engineer, and I thought, Bob, you are in the place where you belong because you got the engineer's bent, and you've been a good appellate judge. Now, why he wanted to go over and get in the criminal county court, I can't imagine.
A new area that he'd never been, I suppose. Now he'd learned all that.
I just don't know why he. I can't imagine that he would like that.
Well, that concludes the interview, and I really appreciate, and I know the State Bar Appellate section, all the attorneys are going to watch this, and they will be posted on YouTube as well as the State Bar Appellate section. Enjoy this.
Well, I've managed to stay out of state bar activities. I think I mentioned to you the only time that I've ever been had my picture in the Texas Bar Journal was when I went to the convention the year they had, I was a 50-year lawyer. And there's several of us standing around that were 50-year lawyers. But I have some good friends that have been 50-year lawyers and longtime judges. But
well, this will be a good one.
The thing that bothers me as much as anything about the Bar Association today, I think we have an emphasis on trying to punish lawyers. And I think we do that with the idea in mind that the public's going to like us better if we clean up our group. Well, if we got crooks, yeah, let's get rid of them. But there's too much emphasis on disbarments and suspensions and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I wish there were some way that if those lawyers have really done something that merits that sort of activity, that we could have avoided having them in the Bar Association to start with. Mm-hmm. Going to law school, now is a chore. My lawyer partner's son, who went to the University of Texas, was very active at the university, was one of the cowboys or whatever they call that group, applied to 4 or 5 law schools, got accepted to all of them but the University of Texas. And that was just wrong. I didn't have to take a test. All I had to do was pay admission fee to pay my tuition. Like the old sign says, I couldn't even spell lawyer now, R1. Yeah. And I've not been I'm not the greatest lawyer that ever lived, but I don't think I've disgraced the Bar Association. And that's what I said when I got licensed in Fort Worth. Fort Worth and Tarrant County has always had a good, honorable judiciary, and I hope that I could not detract from that.
Thank you, and thank you for your great service to the state and all of the years of your practicing law.
Well, they went by in a hurry.
Is it?